So some adjustments have to be made. And that's the same thing with these 8 people. Only 3 of these 8 ever were enslaved. Joseph Rennie, the first one, he got his freedom because his father earned enough money to purchase his freedom. Then there was Robert Smalls. Everybody knows how he got his freedom. And became, to me, the only genuine hero of the Civil War. And I believe the most consequential South Carolinian who ever lived. He got his freedom of his own ingenuity through this great escape. And then there was George Washington Murray, number 8 on the list, who was the only one emancipated. The other 5 were never enslaved. One of whom, Robert Brown Elliott, was educated in Liverpool, England. Came to South Carolina from Massachusetts. He still can't figure out whether or not he's a real citizen. He said he was. And we didn't have the internet back then, so nobody did a research to find out what he really was. He said he had a limp and said he got that limp from fighting the Civil War. Hope looked for days, weeks, years. We can't find who they were in the Civil War. And so, these people were just different. One of whom, Alonzo Rancière, was an educated guy. He was the one I give credit for starting what I call community-based organizations. And that's an interesting story. I'm going to see his great-great-grandchildren going to be at Mars Ground tonight, this afternoon at 3 o'clock. And he had a great nephew who lives in Columbus, Ohio, Fred Rancière, who's an attorney there. I had a long talk with him the day before yesterday. And it's a very interesting story about Rancière, who, although he was in Congress, was also one of the 2 African-American lieutenant governors we had here in South Carolina. We can go through the system. And Richard Kane. Richard Kane was never enslaved. He was born into freedom in what is now West Virginia. Was Virginia at the time he was born. Kane, from Virginia, his family moved over to Ohio, and he went to school at Wilberforce University in Ohio. And from there, he went to a seminary out in Iowa. Then he went to Pastor Bridge Street AME Church up in New York. And he was in New York. Now, when he came to South Carolina, he came to South Carolina sent by the AME Church, Reverend, to resurrect Emmanuel. Because Emmanuel had been burned down. The 1822 insurrection from Denmark PC was hatched in the basement of Emmanuel AME Church, and the white supremacists in Charleston burned the church down. The Embassy Suites that you see now, the Embassy Suites, you may wonder about why it looks the way it looks, because that was the original citadel. And it was built, not as a citadel, but it was built as an arsenal to keep watch over Emmanuel Church. It became the citadel, and the citadel finally moved to where it is today. Now it is an Embassy Suite. It's kind of interesting, because when I left the classroom, when Vicky was my secretary, my office was in that building. That is now the Embassy Suites. That became the county building, but before that, it was the old Citadel. In fact, many of you may recall when you were running around Charleston, we used to call that the old Citadel building. And so this history is so connected, and these people are so connected. I go through all their lives. Now, I'm going to mention one of them. My favorite, of course, is Robert Smalls. My least favorite was DeLodge, who came to Charleston from Aiken. Came to Charleston because he's of mixed race, Haitian background. His family owned slaves. But that was all right with me, but then he served in the Confederate Navy. When you read his life, he gambled on the South winning that war. And he kind of conducted himself in such a way to be on the favorite side when the war was over. And so when the war started going the other way, he started trying to put one foot in each camp. So he wouldn't take a stand. He was always trying to pacify. He became my least favorite. But as we talk, I'll talk about something else. But these people were different. Robert Brown Elliott also didn't like the laws. He said some of the most insulting things in the book about the law. But the laws got in trouble. And they were trying to kick him out of office. Who represented him in court? Robert Brown Elliott fought for him as if he was his long lost brother, though he didn't like him. You have to like people to do what is necessary to improve our communities, improve our lives. We have to learn how to work. I remember one time someone was asking my late wife about me and our relationships. She said, well, I really am in love with the guy. I'm not too sure whether I like him.
That would be another book. So I think one of the things you point out, and we're going to go back to it because you didn't just write this book so we could think about yesterday. You wrote the book so that we could understand how yesterday is really critical to tomorrow. And so we're going to get to that. But I think that pointing out the diversity of voice of African Americans is not a new thing that we have fought for, right? And the idea that we are a block or a simple monolith is not accurate, though I do think that it is fair to say that, frankly, when it comes to honoring and understanding the rule of law and what we have been put in place to do, those of us who have been denied the benefits of the rule of law are more often than not very sensitive to its breaking. So you mentioned that we're obviously not going to get to talk about each of the individuals. We're going to talk about a couple of individuals in context because there's such an amazing story here. And what I like about the fact that you do talk about all eight is I think that everyone who reads this book can find a bit of yourself in the book or a bit of someone you are rooting for in your life. And I really appreciate that validation. And yes, we're going to get to Sir Kane. Okay, I'm just saving him for the end. We're going to start somewhere else. I understand I'm in Lincolnville. We're going to get there. So we're going to start with the gentleman that you have referred to as the most consequential, South Carolinian. Now, note the Congressman's language. Not the most consequential Black South Carolinian. The most consequential South Carolinian, arguably one of the most consequential Americans when it comes to the founding of the country. And many of us, I think, know the story, but we're not going to make full assumptions. But can you talk to us about Smalls in a way that brings you to the conclusion that he is our most consequential citizen from this state?
Well, Smalls was born enslaved in Beaufort, South Carolina. Smalls is a mixed race. His mother never told who the father was. And we've not really come to any conclusions from records, except I come to my own conclusion. And I got it from a long time before I started writing this book. I came to the conclusion that John McKee, who owned his mother, actually fathered Robert Smalls. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. Now, Smalls was a bit rebellious. His mother, he never went out and worked in the fields. More validation than why he was McKee's son. He stayed at the house and hanging around with McKee's children and other children. And so his mother got afraid for his safety. and she talked the key into letting the Smalls go to Charleston and work on the waterfront, or just work. Because when he first got to Charleston, they did not work on the waterfront. He did these are lighter, he did other kinds of things. But working on the waterfront was a choice job. And it was that way when I got to Charleston in 1962. If you got a job on the waterfront, you were good to see. And so he finally got a job on the waterfront. When he was around the age of 17, he was working on the waterfront. And for some strange reason, Smalls kind of, it seems when you read this stuff, that he became a little bit elevated among the enslaved workmanship. And it may have become something like you might call a supervisor or foreman or something. But the three white guys that ran the ship, every Friday, they would leave that ship and they would go into Charleston and would not show up again until late Saturday. And that's a habit that gave these guys around 24 hours of freedom on the ship. One day while they were gone, Smalls flopped on the captain's hat and started prancing around the ship, imitated the captain, and probably mocking him more than imitated. Well, one of his buddies remarked, Smalls, when you put that cap on and prance around the ship, you look exactly like the captain. And that planted the thought in his head as to how he could effectuate this escape, which he did. He started planning it. He brought some friends in on the line on the ship, and his wife. To make a long story short, in the book, you get some of the discussion that went on between his friends, especially between him and his wife, when she pledged her allegiance to go through this thing, even though they knew death could be the result. So, to make a long story short, he studied the currents of the harbor. He studied the whistles, how you pull the screw for the whistle to blow. He knew exactly what needed to be done to have that ship voyage or its passage recognized and honored. And he pulled off this great escape. He smuggled his wife and daughter onto the ship. She brought along a white bed sheet in order to imitate the flag of surrender. He took that ship one night when those guys went into town.
And he went through checkpoints, right? They had to go through
Yeah,
different
go through these
checkpoints.
checkpoints.
Yeah.
And these checkpoints, in order to ensure safe passage, you pull this cord. You also see this on the ship, and the whistles sound. Either a long switch, two shots, or maybe I don't know what they were. Could be one long, two short, or three. We had to go through, I think, 5 checkpoints. The last one being Fort Sumter. Whatever he had to do with the whistles, he did it correctly. They delivered that ship to the Union forces. And this was a very anxious moment for him. Now we know so much about what was going on here because Smalls, this escape was in May, if my memory serves, of 1862. In April of 1862, Smalls is enslaved. In August, he sits down with the President of the United States. How did that happen? Well, after Smalls pulled off this escape, he became a celebrity all over the country. There were people up in New York trying to get him to move to New York, come up and live in New York. People wanted him to come to Pennsylvania. Philadelphia became a favorite place for him simply because he later went to Philadelphia to take the ship to have it repaired. Well, Smalls, because of his celebrity status, General Saxon, who was in charge of the Union forces down in the South, saw them losing the war because of a lack of manpower. And Frederick Douglass had been lobbying Abraham Lincoln, most of us learned this from the textbook, to allow blacks to serve, to fight for their own freedoms. The law did not allow it for a long time. Then the law got changed. Lincoln then would not do it. Saxon felt that because of Small's celebrity status, Smalls might be able to convince Lincoln to let blacks fight. He needed them. And he guessed correctly. So he sent Smalls to Washington to sit down with Lincoln to convince Lincoln to allow blacks to serve in the war. And that's why he was sitting down because this guy had never, remember, not Smalls had never had a formal education. Smalls then was authorized to come back to South Carolina and recruit 5,000 freedmen to fight in the war. That number eventually got up to 180,000. Now, if you look at some books will say 179, some books will say 189,000. I don't know what it was. I was not there. But I just say around 180,000 blacks. And it's documented that 40,000 African Americans died in the Civil War. So this whole notion about what we do or do not do, everybody talk about the Tuskegee Airmen, what they did in World War II. Well, look like what these freedmen did in the Civil War. They gave rise to this country. So this book is an effort on my part to document some real, serious, consequential stuff. And as I've said, I've had more than one professor, one of whom is retired head of the department of history at South Carolina State University, Dr. Hine, who said to me that he has followed the footnotes in this book.
Exactly. Now, of course, Smalls only started, that's only the first of the movie out of the trilogy. I decided it has to be a trilogy. So that's only the first third of the story. So this war hero, we finish up with the Civil War, and basically for you all who are trying to follow the notes, so apparently South Carolina is responsible for the start and the successful conclusion of the Civil War there. But then the war hero could have stayed in Philadelphia, could have gone to New York. The brother decides to come back to South Carolina. And you're not talking in your book about war heroes, you are talking about folks who are elected to the House of Representatives. So talk to us about Small's tenure in the House and what he did essentially for the nation, not just for South Carolina.
Smalls came back. You remember now, I didn't mention this, but when he delivered that ship to the Union forces, he got his freedom. Everybody else wanted their freedom. He also got cash. He turned the cash money. They didn't give him all that he was worth. But later on, Congress visited again and gave him some more money because there was a formula for how much he's supposed to get. It's tied to the worth of whatever it is of the ship. He never got the full, even when they gave him more, he never got it. But he went back to Beaufort. When that war was over, he took his money, he bought the house that he'd been enslaved in, and the house next door. And he lived in the house that he was enslaved in. And his former master, John McKee, this is another thing I used to validate who his father was. John McKee had died and left his wife widowed and penniless. Smalls brought her back into that house and kept her in that house with him until she died. And she died in 1904. Now, there are other things too. But Smalls then got elected to the legislature, the South Carolina legislature, served 10 years or something like that. And then subsequently got elected to the United States Congress and served not consecutive 10 years, but a total of 10 years because he got defeated and he came back again. And one of the reasons Smalls has disjointed records because Smalls was uncompromising. You go throughout this, what you said, he was uncompromising. Always trying to get an education for himself. Every time he got the chance, he would hire somebody to teach him. He was up in Philadelphia for a full year having the ship repaired, and he hired somebody to teach him while I was up there waiting on the ship to be repaired. Smalls was just an incredible human being. You remember I mentioned about the house next door? Next door to Robert Smalls, to show you the connection to history and why you should honor it. Smalls' best buddy was a guy named Julius Irvin Washington. He was his sidekick kid. He was the guy that he could depend on for everything. He allowed Julius Irvin Washington to live in that house.
3 minutes and 40 seconds. More light required.
J.I. Washington. The third, this was the original J.I. Washington. There's a J.I. Washington Jr. who became his sister, Julia Nance, Maceo Nance's wife. J.I. Washington Julia Nance. Their son, Julia Nance's and Maceo Nance's son, Robert, is my district director right now. And always has been. The only district director I ever had. I knew none of this. I knew that J.I. Washington was from Beaufort. I had no idea that J.I.'s father or grandfather was the sidekick of Robert Smalls, and had no idea that his nephew, his sister's son, my district director.
Well, now, this, of course, is why everyone, all of us coming us under a certain age, need to read the book, right? So that we do actually understand all of these ties that bind and weave. And so I'm going to take a thread from Robert Small's story to help us get into Richard King's story, and that is what do you do with the money, right? And so Robert Smalls came back and he invested. Right? He bought homes, he bought houses so that he would have a place to establish. And of course we know that the Right Reverend Richard King, of course, was brought down here to do one thing and one thing only, to help rebuild Mother Emanuel. But somehow, during that journey along the way, he also decided that part of this was not just going to be about religious freedom. It was going to be about the freedom to do whatever, and that required land, that required a place. So talk a bit about King's story in that context, right? From Mother Emanuel to Ebenezer to Lincolnville, and deciding not just to build a church, we're going to build a town.
Yeah. He found this town really to develop affordable housing. That's what the purpose was. He came up here, got this land, and he wanted home ownership. So all the stuff he was talking about now, affordability, ain't new. The town of Lincolnville was found for reasons of affordability, and the flow from all of this interesting stuff. Now, he found this town established this church. But Ken also established Morris Brown Area Church, because when he came back to rebuild Emmanuel, over 6,000 members. The church got too big. He went around the corner and bought property on Morris Street, and that's where he established what is now Morris Brown Church, and named it for Morris Brown, who was the second A&B bishop. The first, of course, was Richard Allen, and the second A&B bishop was Morris Brown. See, Morris Brown was at Emmanuel, he got chased out of town. Went to Philadelphia and became decided to bishop, and became the second A&B bishop. So then, and this is part of what you see going on today. Richard King was indicted, and who was his attorney? He was indicted and on trumped up charges. Of course, he didn't go to jail, but Letitia James is not going to jail. The same stuff that they did to these 8 people. Robert Smalls got indicted. Robert Smalls went to jail. Robert Smalls was given a pardon. And you see in the book where one of the authorities said, Smalls, we don't want to do you no harm. We just got to have this government. So every one of these people were subjected to this. I mentioned Alonzo Ranch, whose son I just talked to, whose great-grandchildren I'm going to see this afternoon. I've known these people all since I've been in Charleston. I had no idea until I got this letter from them. So people see it, Mom, we love your book, especially when you talk about our great-great-granddad. That's how I found out. But I found Fred because I had a book event in Columbus, Ohio, and he was practicing law there, and he came to tell me who he was, and that he was here when they put Ramsey because of the lieutenant governor. They put his picture up in the state house, one of the lieutenant governors, and he came here for that ceremony. He had no idea about my connection with any of this, but he told me an interesting story, which Dr. Matthews, I'm glad you're here today, because when he talked to me yesterday, he says he did not like the size of the picture they had of Alonzo Ramsey. It was a little picture that's about the size of your hand. So he said, I also have a relative who is an artist. And he brought the picture back to his relative, who then did an all painting from the picture. He said, I got that picture. He said, I'm sure that the state would probably never put it up. I said, well, I got a little relationship down there at the African American Museum down in Charleston. I'm telling you a true story. This is that. I said, now I may not be able to convince the state authorities to put the Ranch's portrait there, but I suspect that I might be able to talk somebody in to put his picture in the African American Museum. I'll put you with that somebody.
Congressman, we can have some further conversations about bringing that portrait into the International African American Museum, and then I will kindly lend it to the State House when they acquiesce to put it on the wall.
Absolutely.
All right.
So you know, here's how these connections work. You just mentioned you got this program. You got no idea how you got that grant. But let me tell you how you got that grant. We were trying to reauthorize the civil rights trade. And as you can imagine, all of this stuff is tied to what happened in Alabama, in Mississippi, Selma, all of this. You mentioned the word today that I happen to do often. The civil rights trade and network. Yours truly added the word and network to it. And the reason I did that is because people don't know the connection, and you will not be able to establish that connection unless we can allow them to fund your establishment. So when you add the network to it, it made you, Lincolnville, eligible for the grants that are going to the trail. So it's not just a trail, it's a trail and network. So that's how.
So we have just about 10 minutes left, and Congressman, you have brought us full circle into understanding why these stories from the past are important right now in the present. Of course, we talked about Reverend King being inspired because he wanted to tackle affordable housing. You all read in the book that one of Robert Small's legacy is public education for all students. And so you're looking at a lot of foundational pillars, expected access as our nation marched towards a more perfect union, really being put forward by those who knew the necessity for them because we didn't have them. But that, of course, is not, of course, the only thing that we can learn about these stories. You know, they say those who do not know their past are doomed to repeat it. And I might be tempted to argue that right now that is why there is an intentional suppression of some of our nation's history, because there is an intent to have us repeat a few things. And so, not to bring the room down, but can we talk a little bit about one of the things you talk about in this book is, say, the similarities between perhaps the red shirts and the MAGA movement?
You know, when I started writing this book, we were really doing a fun project. Hope said to me, "You really did finish this book." And she was going to take retirement. She says, I'm going to vote time to help you get this book done. So you do the writing, I'll do the footnote. Now, in the middle of this project, we decided it's just going to be about fun, you know, because the 2020 election came. I was sitting one night watching TV, and I saw them knocking on them doors and windows up there in Detroit, Michigan, trying to break in there because they were trying to alter the results of the elections. And you all remember the phone call finding 11,780 votes down there in Georgia. And that's when we decided, no, it's going to be about these people. It's got to also be about that 95 years between number 8 and yours truly, number 9. How did that come about? Well, it came about because of a document that was written in 1875. This document was written by a guy named Martin Witherspoon Gary. Martin Witherspoon Gary was a brigadier general on the side of the South. Well, in fact, most people thought he was genuinely crazy. This guy is mean. He wrote this thing that's called the Edgefield Plan. If you read Project 2025, you are reading an update of the Edgefield Plan. That was written in 1875. There were instructions black voters to keep them from voting. It's there. And so we decided we were going to show all this in the language. Back then, any instructions you give them, you go to these meetings, you disrupt them, and you don't threaten them, because anybody worth threatening is worth killing. It's all in the plan. You know, when you go, wear red shirts. Why? I don't know why. But he instructed them to wear red shirts. Red shirts have been replaced by red caps. Rifle clubs were organized. That same Charleston Rifle Club, you saw that stuff about the other day. That rifle club was found before the Civil War. Those rifle clubs, and they still exist in Charleston today. And I know that they inducted an African American in it the other day. I'm sure he ain't got no idea what the hell he's a member of. You know, they turned it into a social club. That's not what it was. No, those rifle clubs are not there to be social clubs. They were to inflict violence. And they did inflict violence. And so, what is going on today is voter suppression. In this book, you will see a lot of little things. One of them that I keep thinking about is the 8-box rule. That was the way that every election, every office running for had a separate box. So you want to work for government, you can put in this box. Lieutenant Governor, this box. Attorney General, this box. Brother going in and marking off, anywhere they can build in processes so that they can create errors, steal the election. And many times they had more people voting in the whole county. So these are the things that were done. So what you hear today about the so-called SAVE Act, that is nothing but voter suppression. And the reason we were still in Washington last night is because they're trying everything they can to cut the filibuster off so they can pass the SAVE Act. And I can tell you right now, if the SAVE Act becomes law, we have about 60 African Americans sitting in the United States Congress today. If that becomes law within 4 years, it'll be 30. And it won't be long after that before it be down to 10 or 15. If that SAVE Act becomes law, that was relaxed. In this book, you're going to find that at one point in the 1870s, South Carolina had 5 Congress people. And because of the population, South Carolina is the only state ever in the Union to ever have a majority African American in the population. And because of that majority, of the 5 Congress people we had, 4 of them were black, and Richard King was one of the 4.
Now, let's also flip that script on the other half as well, because I think while we can talk about the accomplishments that we made during Reconstruction and the things that we were able to do because the law was what the law was, make no mistake, these gentlemen were not fully welcomed as they step forward and claim these rights. So as you were looking for us now in the future, right? We see what can happen if they pass the SAVE Act, and we're trying to do that. We're understanding more and more why voting matters, matters, single votes matter. But what can we learn from these stories? And I also want you to include your career as well. What does history tell us about how we win? Because there are a lot of victories in this space that have also become the fabric and the legacy of our nation. What in these stories can we learn from that also teach us how to win and how we should be moving forward today?
Well, 2 ways. Let me tell a short story of one of the other names, Thomas Miller. Thomas Miller was born in what was then called Faridaville, is now Ridgeland, South Carolina. I was at the time. Thomas Miller was not black. Who here went to Cyclone State? Y'all saw all the pictures of Cyclone State of the former presidents. And you saw Miller's picture. And you had the same feeling I had. Something ain't right about these pictures. According to our research, Thomas Miller was the grandson of Thomas Haywood, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was born out of wedlock. The head was his daughter, and was put up for adoption. And then after that, in fact, adopted him. And so he was raised in an African family. He got captured during the Civil War. He was fighting in the Civil War. Spent time in the stock, or whatever you call it, stockade down in Savannah, Georgia. After the war was over, he was taken up to New York. And from New York, he went to Lincoln University and HBCU in Pennsylvania. And when he graduated from there, rather than going back to New York, he made a choice of coming back to Charleston. And on page 229 in the book, you will see his tombstone. And his tombstone, a picture I took to you, it's a blame photographer, I had a picture, and I took it by advice. And I wanted my picture to be in the book rather than send it to professional doctor, because I found his tombstone. There's a mechanic in Charleston. The reason I mention that is because the one way you win is by developing coalitions, developing relationships. He made the choice. And on his tombstone, he says, this is his mission. I serve God and man, not hating the white man, at least that's something that's fair, but the Negro needed the most. So he made the choice. And when Cyclone State was created in 1896, he was in the legislature at the time. He helped to create the school. He had been in Congress, and he lost the re-election, and he came back to the state legislature. And he resigned from the state legislature to become treasurer of Cyclone State. Now, the charter for Cyclone State said, nothing but African American students should go there. No white students should attend, and no white people could teach. Had to be all black teachers, all black students. They didn't say anything about the presidency. And so he became president of Cyclone State. That became, if you went to Cyclone State, and then female, you stayed in Miller Hall, named for Thomas Miller. Now the other way is recognizing the value of a single vote. The three most consequential things that happened after World War II, after the Civil War, the three most consequential things that happened was the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, who set out to undo everything Abraham Lincoln had done, and the House of Representatives impeached him, and when it got over to the Senate, the Senate failed to convict him by a single vote, one vote. And that kept the train on track to disenfranchisement. And then after the 1876 presidential election, no one had got the majority in the Electoral College, and that's when the election was thrown into the House of Representatives. And when the election was thrown into the House of Representatives back in 1876, the election was between Samuel Tilden from New York, Rutherford B. Hayes from Ohio. The House couldn't figure out what to do. So the House appointed a 15-member commission, 15 people, meet with the candidates, study this issue, come back and tell us what to do. When they came back, after a vote, 8-7, they voted to give those disputed votes. There were 20 disputed votes among 3 states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Give those votes to Hayes. Why? When the election was over, at the time you needed 185 electoral votes to get elected president. Tillman had 184, 1 vote short. Hayes had 165, 20 votes short. He needed all 20 of those votes, and he got it because he made a promise. You give me those 20 votes, I will become president, and I'll end Reconstruction. So by a vote of 8-7, they gave him the votes. And then by a vote of 185 to 184, he became president. And 1 month later, Reconstruction started again. So, 1 vote, 8-7, ended Reconstruction. 1 vote, 185 to 184, began Jim Crow. And 95 years after George Washington Murray is when we got another African American who served in Congress. So the value of 1 vote. See, a lot of people think this Reconstruction came in the end because of some big wave came over the country. You hear all people talking about the wave. It wasn't a wave. 1 vote ended Reconstruction. 1 single vote started Jim Crow. That is the value of it.
1 vote, 1 vote. And I think that as I give you sort of the opportunity for your final thoughts and final comments, I think that this is both mollifying, but also encouraging, right? Because we have been obviously hearing the stories and the rhetorics about the vote being taken away, and one of the reasons that that is being done loudly as opposed to quietly is because the narrative about your vote being taken away, the narrative that your vote doesn't matter, is as powerful as simply taking the right to vote is as well. So they can't get to all of those. Some of us actually have passports. You guys would have, well, I got so much documentation. But for me to believe that my vote matters is really, really important. For me to come out of Washington, D.C., out of Detroit, out of Maryland, come down here to South Carolina, be a Democrat, be black. Listen, there are some folks who might think there's no reason for me to go to the polls. But that is not the case. And I think that what this book does show is very sobering, all of the things and all the things that are being repeated. But it also shows how we have been able to, as a community, as a people, as a country, give a hallelujah anyway, every time, right? There was no grand national support for black folks in Congress. We went up there anyway. There was no grand national support for black folks to buy their own land and build their own towns, their own affordable housing. We did it anyway. Lord knows there was no grand decision that we would get to understand the Bible as a trademark story of freedom and emancipation. We did it anyway. There were 95 years dedicated to making sure we would never have another African American from South Carolina in Congress. He did it anyway.
He has a quick middle meeting and good thing. So he is scheduled out of here down, but
one of the things that
so he has to
being
get
an
up there
International
quick.
African American Museum and also reading books like this has taught me is that I can trust a lot of folks. But I think we can definitely trust black folks who have been through something when we get in charge. Story after story after story after all communities. And so I think because of that, it is really, really important that we continue to encourage ourselves. It's important that we continue to know our history. So show up for History Day here on the 30th in that space. And I also want to thank the Congressman and all of the people at the family meeting who decided that you could run again. This is not politics. It's not politics. It's just me honoring historical legacy. I want to live through it one more time. I want the opportunity to live through it one more time, because I also think that as we continue to progress and do need younger, more energetic, more anxious, more new voices, we need it paired with wisdom in all of the roles that we have. Because sometimes some people look too easy. And when folks get up there, I need for folks to understand how this works. And so I'm going to sort of give you the final word with the classic question is, as people take this book and take the conversation today, what do you want them to take with them? What do you want folks to get out of this conversation and reading this book?
Well, aside from the value of what she if I might, I want to use the creation of the International Federation as one of those things. When folk made to Raleigh first approached me with his idea and asked me to chair this period, I told him I knew he was going to be one of those. There's a lot of things going on with that. Some of you recall, mayor, first African American mayor of Virginia, Douglas Wilder. Doug Wilder was advocating so I told Mayor Roberts now, I'll talk to him later. Because I'm inclined to want to do this, but I think it's going to be some controversy. So I don't want to get the family involved in a lot of controversy unless I got approval to do it. Well, she finally she agreed. But tell you what, so the honor in the very first meeting, there was this discussion, almost not what kind of museum this was going to be. And there was the insistence on the part of one person stating that this must be a slave museum. And Judge Wilder was proposing a slave museum. So I said to him, this will not be a slave museum. If I'm going to say this is going to be an African American museum. Slavery will be included in that experience. But this museum is going to have to be about infantry. It's going to be more than that. And then I told him this and kept my fingers crossed. I says, I know what Doug Wilder is saying. He's my fraternity brother. I know him. I was playing golf with him at the time. I said, I'm going to tell you something else. They will never build that museum. And they didn't. To this day, it ain't built. It took us 23 years working on this museum, raising the money. Started out as a $25 million project, ended up $7 million. $100 million. 23 years later and $100 million. We got our museum. I am. International African American Museum. I am.
Sounds good.
Tied to Memphis. I am a man. This museum is the result of collaboration, hard work, staying focused, and don't let anybody turn you around. That is what this is all about. And to honor this today is a very, very special day. Honor Richard King. We talked about founding Lincolnville, establishing this church. Richard King did something else that you all, if you AMEs, still live with today. It's called the recorder. The Christian recorder. That's the name for it today. But Cain wrote, it was the editor. Cain did, he believed in that. When he came to Johnson, he hooked up with others to start this newspaper. Every church back then had its own newspaper. The Baptist church had a newspaper, the AME church had everything. The only one of them that's still in existence today is the Christian Recorder. Richard King did much, much more. He still lives today. He became, is the 14th or 17th, I can't remember which team it is, AME bishop. This guy lives in the lives of every African American today, and they don't even know it.
So we are going to now break, and there's going to be some book signings and all that good stuff. But I want to do one last addendum to the Congressman's story with the I Am history, coming to Lincolnville and that kind of thing. How important it is to sit the young folks down, like sit us, I'm us, and hang out with him, I get to be young folks. Sit us down, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Even if we understand we're stepping into legacy. I am legacy to the battles that were fought in that space. And there were some things that I almost let go because I didn't know the story. The very first time I had a conversation with Congressman Clyde, I'm like, okay, he's gotta let him know who's coming in here and make sure I have a single approval. Okay, we'll do all this. And he's talking, and he's telling these stories as you're hearing the story. That's when I learned the story of when you saw that the letters for International African American Museum would spell out I am, and that it reminded you of the I am a man shirts. We were having a discussion at the museum at the time about whether or not we could use the acronym, about whether or not we would allow ourselves to be shortened in public with IAAM. And it was big, I'm like, okay, this is a lot of work. I'm a poet, I could come up with some other shortened way to say this, and I almost let that go. But after talking to the congressman, I understood, why it was so important, and a little whisper said, and that's actually about it, you fighting. And so I knew what the assignment and what the appointment was at that point. It wasn't that I was going to ignore it or just release it. I didn't know. So I had to sit at the foot of the elder, folks who had been in there, to give me the rest of the story, to understand that I was about to finally be a part of this thread that we had been pulling on. So, on behalf of myself, also the congressman, for all of you out there who have gone through the pains of sitting the young person down and making them listen to the story, even when our eyes glaze over, we are still listening. And it will be where it needs to be in our minds when we fight the battle that we were assigned to fight. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Vanessa, and she's going to tell us how to get a book signed.